Oh, I'm all nervous, Jeff.
We're very, very pleased to see all of you again this evening. I think we're growing in numbers, so it's very much welcome your support. Please have a word if you can't hear us, because we're not trained actors or public speakers. Do say, and we'll try our best. There are people around with Community Heritage Initiative badges on, so if you have any questions, just have a word with them as we go around. Well, welcome to this, the third and final in this series of walks through the old town of Scarborough. My name is Trevor Pearson, and with my colleagues from the Scarborough Community Heritage Initiative, we hope to explain something of the history of Scarborough to you this evening on this walk. We're going to talk about our things we've found on our archaeological digs and about the clues that we've got from old documents and from things that you can see all around us. Last week we went back in time to the time of the friars. Two friars showed us round some of Scarborough's religious sites last week, and we certainly learned something about the religious life of Scarborough 600 or 700 years ago. And then on the walk before that, we learned how King Henry II had deliberately created the town of Scarborough in 1155, and how most of the streets that we use today as we walk around the old town were deliberately laid out on a crisscross pattern established as part of setting out the town in 1155. Now this week we'll be looking at the harbour area, which was really the economic heart of the medieval town on account of the town's fishing industry, its shipbuilding and its widespread trading contacts. We'll have more to say about that later on. To accompany us on our walk tonight, we first of all have William Meggertson, who refers to himself as a housewright, and I'll leave it to him to explain what a housewright is. He will tell us about some of the medieval houses which we'll pass by on our walk this evening. But first, I would like to introduce the notorious Scarborough merchant, Robert Acklam. Boo! 600 years ago, Robert was the head of a family of rogues and villains who always somehow managed to stay one step ahead of the law and amass great wealth in the process. Any resemblance to any characters on the town council is purely coincidence. However, rather than dwell on these dark goings-on this evening, Robert will guide us around the harbour from where his vast wealth came. So, Robert Acklam, over to you.
No one can rival my power or my wealth. Even the King's Sheriff dare not stand in my way. I have great wealth from my ships in the harbour, from my houses in the town, and my lands outside the walls. I sit on the town council, where my wealth buys me many friends, and I represent this ancient borough loyally in the King's Parliament in Westminster. My family were not always so wealthy. They came from a tiny village in Acklam, a day's ride away to the west in the chalk hills above Malton. But they moved to Scarborough and settled here 300 years ago, and were among the first to settle in King Henry's new town. In the village of Acklam, we laboured in the fields, year in, year out, for no profit to ourselves. But we prospered here in Scarborough in the free air of King Henry's new town. Mark my words, I use fair means or foul to make sure that never again does an Acklam labour for the profit of another man. What say you, housewright?
I am William Meggertson, housewright. A strange word that. You will have heard of wheelwrights and shipwrights. I am a housewright, a master carpenter who built houses, and the caliper is one of the signs of my trade. There were many building trades in Scarborough. Masons, slaters, painters, carpenters. They were all listed in 1467 in the town archives. But most of the houses were timber. So that's made a lot of work for us master carpenters. Not like other towns where there were stone houses where the masons ruled. In Scarborough, the master carpenters, the house wrights, were the ones who controlled the building of houses. We controlled all the other trades. We designed the houses, we set them out, and we organised the building. We built this town. He might have controlled it, or he might have thought he controlled it, but we built it by the labour of our hands. And we made a fair old living out of it, honestly, not like some I could mention.
I have heard that you built a house in the wrong place.
That was back in 1459, and I'll hear no more of that.
Let us away!
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hands up! This is the Sandgate, a street that came down through the town wall and down to the harbour and the sands. It curves this way and that, so that it can be defended. As you're coming up here and you come past the wall, people can look down on you and find out who's going backwards and forwards, up and down past the town wall. There will be a gate through up there, about where the Leeds Hotel is. We didn't build houses like this in my day, all brick and plaster and glass windows. We didn't have glass windows. And as I recall it, the old wall runs right under where these houses now stand. And if I recall correctly, there was a house here built hard up against the Sandgate by John de Beverley, and it belonged to the Fountains Abbey about the year 1190. It was a stone house, and that was unusual in Scarborough. There were only 3, 4 or 5 stone houses in Scarborough. All of the others were timber. Stone houses were very, very unusual. Walter, son of Gomer, a clerk, he built one for Malton Priory. So that's 2 stone houses we know of. We called that the Great House. It was so special, it was called the Great House. But most of the houses were timber, as we'll see later on. And that was good for us carpenters. Can this archaeologist here, who delves in the ground, tell us about this place? Tell us more, archaeologist. And where's my friend the merchant? We're going elsewhere.
Goodbye and good riddance. What I wanted to say here really is that the last 2 walks I've been talking about the Damiette stream. I hear that it actually reappeared on the ground at the weekend with the heavy rain.
Yeah.
Now the stream actually flowed into the sea just where we are here, and it still emerges about by the side of the West Pier. So if you go down there at low tide, you can actually see where the stream comes out. The other thing I want to tell you about here is an excavation underneath this building that was done in 1976, right in the bed of where the Damiette stream was. The excavation found the old gatehouse that Chris was just mentioning there, and below it they found what they thought was the remains of a Roman harbour building. There's possibly a Roman harbour down here which was built so that the ships, the Roman galleys, could come into the South Bay and supply the signal station on the headland up there. We've had no other opportunities to excavate down here, but there's still something for the future. Perhaps we might find more of Roman Scarborough where we're standing now. Okay, well, I think we better try and catch up with the other 2.
What are the bailiffs going to do about the noise of these seagulls? Is that too controversial? Mr. Bailiff, what about this traffic of carts going up and down here? That is noisome as well.
It certainly is. We might be able to do something about that.
And they're going to your ships, aren't they?
Oh, yes.
No. I want to show you. Well, I did want to show you, but it's too dark to see. A fine piece of my handiwork there behind you in the Newcastle packet. You'll have to come back afterwards and look along that passageway there and see that fine example of a piece of carpenter's handiwork. A fine piece of medieval carving in there. Carving of roses, of bunches of grapes, of the goddess Justitia, and of a fishwife carrying a creel with a fish in it that the goddess of justice is taking out of the creel. That's fine craftsman stuff, that would take us carpenters many a long day to carve. This, in its day, was a large E-shaped building fitted out at the top. What you see now, that's less than 100 years old, I'm told. This bit here, all fakery. That's a load of fraud. But down the side there is just that little fragment of a very nice house that I helped build. It's as good as a house as any house you'll find in York. And at the other side there was another big carved frame coming out with another face carved on it. That was taken away about 100 years ago, I'm told. So it had lasted a good few years, that piece of our handiwork from so many years ago. The archaeologist was going to tell us something here, but he says it's too noisy, and also people come out to shout at him as well. Move on.
Come on, time's money. Come on. My money. Can you hear me at the back?
Yeah.
Thank you. I shall begin.
Thank you, kind sir. Okay. Here you can see some of the changes that I brought about when I was bailiff of this town, which meant I had control of the town council and its revenues. Where we are standing now, or just a little bit further down there, used to be an open beach with a steeply sloping cliff above. Fishermen, in their tiny cobble boats, would run aground here at high tide to unload their catches into carts and draw them up alongside their boats that they drew upside the boat. But there was no place for my large ships to offload their cargoes. Instead, they had to ride the waves out there in the bay, sometimes for many days, whilst they waited for their turn at the berth by the dock by the Sandgate. Of course, you see, this wasted my time and my money, so we decided to build a new harbour for the ships to dock. And we did this using the town's rubbish. The plan, though ingenious, I say so myself, out there we built a strong harbour wall to keep back the sea. And after it was raised to the height of a man, we dumped rubbish on the beach behind it. Each and every house in the town contributed to this great heap of refuse, and before long we raised a vast area of new ground for building on behind the new harbour. You see, it was my money that built the new houses here, all tightly packed together along the harbour front. And of course, it was to my purse that all the rents came afterwards. Here now, I shall introduce the archaeologist, who I am sure enjoys digging around in all the old rubbish from centuries ago.
Thank you, yes. All I wanted to say here, just to reinforce what Robert Acklam is reminiscing about, here, this slope here was originally the old cliff line. It's been cut back and shaped and altered. But you've got to imagine here a grassy cliff before there was a town. And then down here, the slope off in that direction was the beach. That's where the boats originally would have docked, would have been drawn up on the beach. No sophisticated pier or harbour at that time. But what's happened is, with all this reclamation, all the rubbish that's been thrown down into there, onto the beach to raise the ground level, it's left us archaeologists with a tremendous area for digging in, because water still runs off the high ground up there, below the surface usually, but above the ground at the weekend. It ponds up down in the bottom here. You also get water percolating in from the harbour, so it means everything, this vast area down here, is kept moist. It's been damp ever since the land was reclaimed from the sea. And as a result, here in this part of Scarborough, we find things preserved that we don't find anywhere else. Here we find well-preserved bits of wood, bits of leather, even pollen grains that can tell us a little bit about what people had in their houses, what they were eating, what they were throwing out. And wherever we dig down here, all the artefacts are really well preserved. They've not been disturbed since the Middle Ages. Literally, it is people's rubbish. When they broke a pot, they didn't chuck it out of their front door. They was all collected up and chucked down here in the harbour for us to find 600 or 700 years later. In fact, we found more pottery down here in some small excavation trenches than we have in some of our larger excavations up in the higher part of the town, because this is where people were dumping their rubbish. In fact, the process just carried on and carried on after the Middle Ages. So now the modern day seafront is a good 100 yards from where it started off, where we are. Now, the process just carried on and carried on. Now, of course, the people weren't doing it just to give us more space to have amusement arcades. They were doing it because they needed to live down here. This is where the money could be made in the medieval town. And in fact, from now on, as we carry on the walk, we'll see some examples of a few of Scarborough's surviving medieval houses. So here I'm looking out for William Meggetson, the house wright, to tell us a little bit more about the house down there.
You'll have to look at this as you go past, but you'll see how we built a small Scarborough house, a typical Scarborough house. As you go around the corner, you'll see that at one stage it's what we call jetted. It had another floor on, sticking out over the road. I don't know why somebody would want to take that off after we spent all the time building it. And you see, well, I can see that this top floor is built of old timbers. When ships had reached the end of their useful life, they used to pull them up on the beach and take them apart. There's still lots of useful timber in an old ship, and we used this in Scarborough houses, in the roofs, to build the roofs and the rafters. And sometimes you'll find this is perhaps the name of the ship carved on, because we like to use that. It's a good bit of wood. And you see here a big curving beam. Do you see that? Yeah. With a little bit of carving at the top there. Curves outwards, and inside there's another beam going diagonally. We call that the dragon beam, and that would be supporting not one floor above, but two. This was a big house when it was first built, and into that dragon beam would be joists coming in. 6 inches square, oak joists. This was a good, sturdy house when it was built. And here, you can see the stone plinth. The Grondwallers would dig for this. They were useful kind of blokes, the Grondwallers. They dug holes that you could build things out of. Not like these archaeologists, wherever they've gone, who just dig holes for the sake of it. And then the masons would come along and they would build the stone plinth. And all the Scarborough houses have a stone plinth. And then we carpenters would come along and erect the frame. But we made it beforehand in our workshop. We'd cut the pieces and the joints. I hear tell nowadays that you have houses that are called kit framed. They come on a lorry, whatever one of those is, rollies we call them, and carts. and assemble them very much as we did here. And we assembled these from oak which was green. And we assembled them with joints and holes to tie them together, and we drove a dowel in. And as the timber seasoned, the whole lot tightened up. We weren't stupid, you know. Green oak was a lot easier to work, and it made a lot stronger house as it tightened up. And these are called studs. These bits that run upwards, some of which are hidden. And when we first built this house, it was being filled with wattle and daub, sort of willow fronds, as it were, woven, and then daubed with a mixture of cow dung and horsehair and pitch, which we boiled and stirred for several days and then smeared it on. Lovely stuff. Makes a nice watertight wall. So, there you are, a nice little Scarborough house. We built lots of these all over Scarborough, but you can see very few of them now. So, where have the others gone? Where's that archaeologist? Archaeologist!
You get a very clear impression here with the grassy bank of what the South Bay must have looked before they developed the harbour. You know, this sort of grassy boulder clay slope there with the beach down where we stood here. In fact, we think that at an early period the waterfront used to run along Quay Street, which is the road we're going to be following now. So sometime in the 13th century the actual waterfront was here where we're standing now. So you get a clear impression about how much has been reclaimed from the sea over the last 600 or 700 years. Okay, Robert Acklam.
Well, on Whitehead Hill, I remember there was lots of thatched houses up there, thatched with heather. But most of our houses we put on stone tiles. They came from Forge Valley. They were about this big, with a hole in the top. And our young lads, when they had nothing better to do, used to whittle away at a little bit of oak, and that went through the tile and hung on the roof. Good roofs those were. We were lucky here in Scarborough, having Forge Valley. Down in Beverley, they had tiles made of clay, but many towns just had thatch, and that was a bad thing, because that burnt. So after the fire of London, they began to bring rules in, doing away with thatch and encouraging more and more people to put on roof tiles. Where's that Robert Acklam?
Never mind blathering on about roof tiles. Tell us, house right, about the house that you built the wrong way.
You're always banging on about that house I built in the wrong place,
House
aren't you?
right, house wrong, I don't know which to call you.
It wasn't in the wrong place. He's got it wrong again.
Oh, yes, it was.
It was not in the wrong place. It was too big, maybe. It took us to court. They were always doing that in the 1500s, 1400s, taking us to court. It was 12 inches too close to the road and 9 inches too far down the garden. And the neighbours took us to court. Neighbours, they're always arguing about houses built in the wrong place. And it wasn't. It was just a little bit too big. So there. Not listening.
Oh, sorry. So there what?
It was a bit too big. It wasn't in the wrong... I bet it was you who started this litigation.
Me? Never. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we have the wrong script, but never mind, let's go on. So I shall now tell you about how different this part looks here today. In my time, the boats used to dock right here, about here, at the far end of the alley. The rise and fall in the lane looks to be about where the harbour wall used to run, and there were houses built right along the facing out to the bay. Whoa, let me get my thing back. The harbour wall was built of stone with stout out oaks to brace it from the King's Forest at Scarborough. The wall was strong enough to withstand the worst that the sea could throw at it. though its upkeep was a great burden to the town.
That's because it would require you to pay, wouldn't it? Yes.
Yeah. And we were always seeking money from the King's purse, from the King's purse to keep it well repaired. However, in my time, the fame of the Scarborough port had spread to the furthest corners of the ocean, and the harbour was always busy. We saw most ships come here in summer when the shoals of herring used to pass along the coast. That was the time of the famed Scarborough Fair, which lasted for 40 days. Then the town was packed with merchants from all across Europe who came here to fill their boats with the barrels of our best salted herring. Further round the bay, where the harbour wall didn't reach, the sands became one great market at the time of the fair. There were stalls selling exotic spices and exotic cloths from the Orient, stalls with furs from the Baltic and other rare fruits from the Mediterranean. I had nothing to barter except my cunning, and I used to send my boats out to sea, out of sight of the land, so that they could buy up all the herring before the fishermen had chance to land them at the port. This meant I could force those foreign merchants to buy their barrels of salted herrings at my inflated prices. Oh, those were the days.
I think we'd better move on before you're stoned in the street. It's where the bakehouse was. We didn't have bakers. Mother's Pride didn't come in vans, you know. There was a bakehouse and people would take their bread for baking there. It's a good place to stand here and look at how things were in my day. They're much changed now. Over there, beyond that little timber building, there's the Three Mariners, said to be the oldest alehouse in Scarborough. I wouldn't know anything about that though. It used to be much longer. You can't see from here, but if you look when you go past and look closely, you'll see how the house right numbered the timbers. Frames 5, 6 and 7 are still there. You see it on the end. The frames are numbered 5, 6 and 7. Where are 1, 2, 3 and 4? They've disappeared, been taken and used elsewhere. The building was a lot longer than it is now, and I don't think it was an alehouse. I don't remember it being an alehouse in my day. I'm sure it was a long warehouse. I'm pretty certain of that. Probably for keeping his herring in or something like that. A herring house, was it?
Yes, I think it was.
Ah, yes, yeah. And when you go past, not only will you see the number on the frame, but you see where the previous frame has been, notched into the mortises I told you about over there. The front is strange, I don't recognise that. We didn't build in brick like that. I think that's been put on later, a lot later than my day, with those fancy windows that slide up and down and those little fancy bits over the top. I'm sure there's a name for that, but we didn't know of it. We didn't build in brick. And nearer is the Dog and Duck, another little timber frame building. You can see as you go past how the frame's different. Lighter than we built. That's maybe built about 100 years after I was working here in Scarborough. Totally different. And look at the way they're filled in with brick, rather than that horrible wattle and daub that we used to have to use. A later house. And I recall opposite, over there somewhere, a tall 3-storey house stood, jetted out almost across the road. It had no windows facing the street. That was very, very strange. And it was pointing with its gable towards the street. Do you remember when that Henry II chap was taking you around? He told you about the taxes he was charging and how people who built their houses this way only had to pay 4p, and those who built them that way paid 6p. That was a 4p house. They were all 4p houses on Quay Street.
Be mine.
Yours Oh, you would be one of these who would build a sixpenny house, wouldn't you? Just to show how rich and powerful you were.
Yes, I would.
Yes, I know your type. And I have heard tell that it was called Crazy Cottage. This house, there was one either side, almost touching across the street. Crazy Cottage, because as the frame had dried and tightened, it had twisted. But it still stood up for years and years and years. Crazy Cottage.
But it
A
was
lot of
straight
the-
inside, Chris.
It was straight inside, I remember that. Yes.
Just
Yeah.
give my word in, Chris.
You wouldn't let it bend like that inside. No, no.
1 year, but
Well, was he born there?
no, he's bought it when he was about 3 years old.
Yes.
Yes. And so I got married from there,
You got married from
from
there.
that side.
That was the first mistake, wasn't
That
it?
was the first and the last.
And you've completely thrown me now. I mean,
I'd like to know.
here's somebody come back from the past to tell us about Crazy Cottage.
Was it about 40 odd years ago?
Yes, 1965, I think it was knocked down.
Yes.
And the pieces are somewhere, they're in Pontefract, or near Pontefract, or is it Wakefield? One of those historic towns over there in the West Riding. Lying there all numbered, waiting for someone to come along and rebuild it. It might happen one day, perhaps. Anyway, archaeologist, where are you?
I'm here.
Do you have anything to say? What
Oh,
do you
my
have to
turn,
say?
is it? Oh, right.
Your turn, yeah, do some
well.
talking for a change.
Okay, I'll see you later. Well, what I wanted to tell you about here is archaeology is often a bit like doing a very prolonged jigsaw puzzle. And there's no better demonstration of that than where this area that we're standing at here. Now, in the late 1960s, when we were all too young to be digging, I'm pleased to say, the Scarborough Archaeological Society excavated a small trench in the middle of this road. And at 6 feet below the ground level, they found a stone pavement laying on the beach. Now, they couldn't make head or tail of it. But then in 1978, when I'd grown up a bit and I was involved in the digs, we did an excavation underneath this house here. That's in 1978, so it's nearly getting up for a quarter of a century ago. And lo and behold, at a depth of 6 feet, we found part of the same stone pavement. So even though the two digs were many years apart, we both found bits of the same feature. And what we think here is this is where the fishing boats were being dragged up onto the beach before they built a harbour wall behind you. And just to make the beach a bit more solid, that created a sort of slipway of large stone slabs, which then got buried underneath all the rubbish that was later thrown into this area. Now that doesn't end the story of this part of Scarborough's archaeology, because in 1996 we returned to excavate here in this bit of land with the stone wall there and these very unsafe looking timber props propping that building up. Well, we did a bit of an excavation on this lower bit here and also right up the slope as well. And here we found the well-preserved remains of a medieval house, a house like William Meggetson would have built down here 500 or 600 years ago. It was actually built on a pile of this medieval rubbish. They here literally raised the ground level, thrown all this rubbish and soil onto the old stone pavement, raised the ground level by as much as 6 feet, and then built a house. None of the floors survived, but just the foundations, stone foundations, but he would have had a timber superstructure on top, a bit like the house you've been looking at back down there. So you've got to imagine a whole row of these small gable end-on houses lining this road here, facing straight out onto the waterfront. We also found that they terraced the natural slope up there and built lots of houses going up the hill as well. So when they'd run out of energy to build out into the harbour, they also built up the slope as well. So the whole area was packed with houses and just narrow alleyways left, like the narrow alleyway of the boats that we walked along a little bit earlier. So that's a little bit of the archaeology of this particular area. It's a spot that we keep returning to about every 15 years. So I'm due to be back digging here in about 2010. They've been planning to demolish these buildings here for as long as I can remember. So maybe the next time we'll be digging here is when these come down, because they're a little bit unsightly and really don't do anything to the character of the area. Right, okay, well we're running on now to the end of Quay Street. We're going to hear something about the burning of Scarborough in 1066.
To say it is so nice to see so many Scarboroughians, if you are Scarboroughians. Just because you live in Scarborough doesn't mean to say you're actually Scarboroughians, does it?
We are.
Yeah, we are.
All right then, hands up.
I'm a bottom ender, love. Let's make
How many real Scarboroughians? Can you put your hands up? Well, that's good.
Let's be born here.
That good? Excellent. I'm just asking if you're a Scarboroughian, born and bred. No. Yeah, that one is.
Let's see that again. How many?
How many Scarboroughians, born and bred? Excellent.
That's pretty good, isn't it?
And
Yeah.
how many, this is everybody, how many people have been on all three walks?
You're mad.
It was free.
And how many people have learnt something over the last 3 weeks? Excellent. He's pulled my last line.
Well, how many people haven't learnt anything? Historians. I'll see you later.
Okay.
You missed the first two.
So,
You better. So I was going to make a subscribe.
1, 2, 3.
Get on with it.
So we pause here, and I'll tell you something about the famous history of the port of Scarborough. I heard tell that the Vikings lived here under the shadow of the headland. But their town was later burnt to the ground in the year of our Lord, 1066, by the Norwegians, led by their fierce warrior king, Harald Hardrada. I've been practicing that. Harald Hardrada. Though the events took place nearly 400 years ago, they are still talked about by the local bottom enders of this town. They say a fleet of 300 longships with their dragon prows came into the harbour, into the bay, and landed the Norwegian army on the sands. But they did not attack the town directly. They went around onto the headland where the castle stands now, and there they lit a great bonfire on the edge of the cliff. And when it was all aflame, they pitched it down into the town below and caused such a fierce blaze among the houses that there was nothing else left to save. King Harold and his Norwegian army were massacred barely a month later. And so Scarborough was avenged. Sorry. But this destruction meant that I've got to change my script. Because the last bit's better. And I've lost it. Where is it? There you are. In this way, Scarborough was avenged. But the fire and destruction unleashed by those accursed Norwegians meant that the seagulls had this bay to themselves until King Henry built his castle on the headland and founded our fair town on the slope below. Let us away.
Sorry, we're running a little bit late, but I hope you'll bear with us. We're just going to have a real dramatic finale in a minute, so it's well worth staying for. Because they've really been gearing themselves up for this. I just wanted to maybe say a little bit more about the supposed Viking period in Scarborough. When you stand somewhere like this, the account of the destruction of Scarborough in 1066 really comes alive. You can imagine the Viking army being up on the headland up there, building a big bonfire, throwing it down the slope, and the settlement down here at the harbour's edge catching fire, all the houses burning, the people dying. Very dramatic account that's found in one of the Viking sagas about this attack on Scarborough in 1066. And as a result, Scarborough isn't mentioned in the Domesday Book, the great survey that the Norman King William had done in 1086. 20 years later, there's no mention of Scarborough. So it all sort of builds a picture that this area was destroyed and left vacant until King Henry II came along and built the castle and planted the town that we have today. Well, it's a nice story, and as archaeologists it gives us something to hope for when we're digging in this part of the town. But so far, the only thing that we've found of Viking Age Scarborough is one piece of pottery. No sign of a town that's been burnt to the ground, no sign of a big bonfire or anything like that. One piece of pottery. And we didn't find it down there, we found it up near the Castle Hill. So it's a real puzzle, trying to match the story with the archaeology. Perhaps all trace of this earlier town has been washed away by the south waters of the South Bay. Perhaps we'll never find it. Perhaps actually the events happened further round the bay. It wasn't the Castle Hill that the Vikings went onto, it was a hill where the Grand Hotel is. And perhaps Viking Scarborough was where the gap is there, where the cliff bridge is. But that means Viking Scarborough was destroyed when they built the museum. So you can't win, can you? But that's another possibility, is it's over there. If you want to read any more about it, I'd advise you to buy the book. I'll advertise it now because everything we've been talking about on these tours, you can get a lot more information out of this book here, which you can buy in Waterstones. As part of this initiative, we will be producing other books over the next couple of years. We've set up a website as well, so those of you who are on the internet can sort of see how that changes and how we add more information. And we'll also be doing a video. Jeff here is filming me at the moment. But anyway, that's a little bit more about what we'll be doing in the initiative. I think now time is pressing on, so let's move on and have the final say from William Meggetson and Robert Acklam.
I am saddened that so little of my craft work survives. A few timbers maybe, but scarce else remains. I built many fine houses, using good strong oaks from Scarborough Forest. How hard I laboured. What do you want? What do you want?
Come on here a bit so everybody can hear.
Right.
Want the money back, and I'm not giving them any money back.
No, you wouldn't. How hard I laboured to fashion those sturdy frames, but now I fear there is scarce anything left of my work, save for a few rotting posts down below the ground. Still I have my memories. That's what it comes to for us old men. I have my memories of how things looked in this fine town, especially down there by the harbour, where we even took land from the sea to make space for our fine buildings.
I regret none of this. You forget, Master Housewright, how your houses stank from the dung and horsehair lining the walls, and how they let in rain.
Not my houses.
Oh yes.
No.
And the drafts. And how the smoke from the open fires used to hang in the air.
That's a bonus point. Other towns didn't even have fires. Coal was coming down the coast. We could burn it.
Unlike you, I have been heartened by what I have seen here tonight. Look at those great stone piers out in the bay. There was nothing like them in my day, and I take them as a sign that my home port, the source of my wealth and my power, remained prosperous long after my passing. Enough now, William Housewright. Let us away, for I must find a barber to rid me of this beard.
Thank you very much, yes. as usual, I'd like to end by just saying a few words as thanks, especially as this is the last of the 3 tours, so the last one we'll be doing for a while, but I think it's something we'd like to do again, and I hope you will support us. And first of all, can I thank the members of the team here who've been handing out the leaflets and one of whom you might recognise as King Henry II. Hey! Now, I'd like to finish tonight by thanking our 2 performers. I think we picked the noisiest part of Scarborough to go around tonight, and I'd like to thank you all for staying with us and trying your best to hear. First of all, could I thank Chris Hall? And never to be repeated, perhaps, with a beard anyway.
However,
Rowena Marsden.
On Saturday,
I will be a woman.
and we will have her in a pillory because we were going to try her for being a harridan and a scold. And a witch. And I think they're going to try me for being a wife poisoner and a traitor.
Excellent.
I think John Rushton's going to try us.
It'll be tried.
So the fun continues anyway, so thank you all for staying so late, and we hope to see you all again before too long. Right, good night everybody.